Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, and thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for allowing me to do this, as I withheld this back yesterday because of the time constraints. Mr. Speaker, sir, I wish to provide an update on the 52nd annual meeting of the Asian Development Bank, which is very successfully hosted in Fiji from the 1st to the 5th of May, with the theme Prosperity Through Unity. This is the first time that any Pacific island country actually hosted the ADB annual meeting, Mr. Speaker, sir. In the wider Pacific region, if we include Australia and New Zealand, the last time it was held in this wider Pacific region, Australia hosted last in 1969, New Zealand last hosted in 1995. 23-year gap, but never held in the Pacific. Mr. Speaker, sir, as the Honourable Prime Minister highlighted in his opening remarks, that this actually milestone marks, and I quote, marks the end of an era of missed opportunities, unquote, for Fiji and the Pacific. The huge success of the annual meeting has further raised Fiji's position in the region and made us very much stronger and respected not only in the region, but on the global stage. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, sir, I have to admit personally, we were quite nervous about, whether we can pull this off, because this was really an opportunity to showcase ourselves to the rest of the world. And we were overwhelmed, Mr. Speaker, sir, with the positive feedback received from the ADB President, the ADB Management, the Deputy Prime Minister of Japan, and various other ministers from the Asia-Pacific region and various other delegates. And Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, sir, of ADB publicly stated the event was very well organized, surrounded by the beautiful ocean and helped by the perfect weather. It has been hailed as one of the best ADB annual meetings ever, and we should all be proud of this. Around over 2,000 participants, 2,258 participants attended the meeting, including government delegates, ADB personnel, guests, observers, civil society organizations, media, and other accompanying persons. Participants enjoyed our culture and traditions, appreciating the warm and welcoming Fijian hospitality. Many, for the first time, had the opportunity to experience our natural beauty and the pristine environment. And also, more importantly, we were able to show to the world and policymakers from the larger countries the vulnerabilities and unique challenges we are exposed to, such as climate change. Mr. Speaker, sir, the hosting of the ADB annual meeting had numerous benefits for us, including the economic spin-offs, marketing for Fiji, not only as a tourist destination, but also leveraging this successful event to promote us to capture the fast-expanding MICE market. Mr. Speaker, sir, to host meetings, incentives, convention, exhibitions, which is the high niche segment of the tourism sector, we need to make a huge inroad into this area. Mr. Speaker, sir, the FNPF has already announced in building the convention center, which we talked about some time back. The initial estimates, Mr. Speaker, sir, show that the overall economic impact from hosting the ADB meeting was over $30 million, with the exemplary level of interest shown for meeting. Many delegates had brought their families and friends over to Fiji. There's a lot of spending on airfares, accommodation, transportation, spending at restaurants, bars, sightseeing, and spending on other recreational activities. Our local entrepreneurs, our SMEs, designers also benefited from this particular event. We also had numerous traditional practices, dances. We had the Bar Women's Forum all on display, sending their goods, and many other products, including from the Fiji Arts Council, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, of course, market vendors, taxi drivers, everybody benefited from this. Mr. Speaker, sir, many were impressed with what we had to offer. Many have already started making plans for second trips, and the benefit from the word-of-mouth marketing is also going to be immense, as Asia is one of the largest source of outbound tourism. Mr. Speaker, sir, we had, of course, now laid a very solid basis for multilateral meetings, and in fact, the ADB is already talking about coming back to Fiji again. Our goal, Mr. Speaker, sir, is to have what we call the icing on the cake, which would be to host the annual World Bank and IMF meeting. But for that, of course, we need to have a large convention center. World Bank, IMF, as a matter of interest, every 2 years goes outside of Washington. Last time they were outside of Washington was in Bali, and we want to be in that space also. Mr. Speaker, sir, of course, we were, as highlighted, it was not just only about tourism per se. We were able to bring to the fore many of the challenges faced by Pacific Island countries, be able to discuss many of the issues in respect of financing, grants, concessional funding, and the catastrophic challenges. We had people that went and visited Kore Pita. Those of you know Kore Pita and Lautoka, about what fantastic work that Peter Drysdale has done. Of course, during that particular event, the Honourable Prime Minister was in Vio Island, where we launched the rural electrification program, which is standalone hybrid systems, which was initially funded by the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation. And of course, we've got about 10 other remote villages and locations that will be now having access to the hybrid systems. Mr. Speaker, sir, I'd like to very quickly thank everybody responsible for the logistic arrangements, the liaison officers from the Civil Service, the Reserve Bank of Fiji, the Ministry of Economy, the personal protection officers from the police force, those ensuring security and stability. If those of you were privileged to be there, unfortunately the Honourable Leader of Opposition said he would be there, but he didn't turn up. The MAC that had been set up has never been done in such a manner. The actual logistics and security details are phenomenal. I would also like to thank, of course, all the hotel staff, the drivers, the tour guides, and of course the volunteers. Honourable Garen Tambua, of course, was not there, so she did not have the opportunity to speak to the volunteers, but I spoke to literally hundreds of the volunteers, and they were very glad to be there, very glad to be made part and parcel of this historic occasion, and I can tell you that all of them have been paid. You don't even know your facts. All of them have been paid. They knew what they were getting into, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sir, you see, this is again, we've got another member of La La Land now, another one's on the way too. Mr. Speaker, sir, the pride and professionalism of the staff and all other volunteers, slavery, what nonsense are you talking about? We engage them into slavery, the volunteers. These are university students who agreed to the meal allowances, the transportation. They were paid allowances on a daily basis. Slavery is when you force somebody to do something they don't want to do. These people gladly volunteered to do that.
Order.
What nonsense.
Order.
You need to go and check the English dictionary. Mr. Speaker, sir, and I urge the volunteers who are listening now, who were there, volunteers, who are listening now, to listen to the nonsense and the obtuseness that's coming from the other side. And they can tell you the richness that they actually envisage. They were able to interact with people from different countries, be able to get rich their experience. Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, I would like to particularly single out the Permanent Secretary for Civil Service, who has just become in the past few days now the Permanent Secretary for Health and Medical Services, Bernadette Welsh, who, by the way, Honourable Randondo, is an expatriate, who took the overall charge for all the logistics and making sure that everything was in order. Without her professionalism, including eye for detail and ability to garner the right people around her, the ADB conference would not have been successful as it was. By the way, Mr. Speaker, sir, Bernadette Welsh also hosted 2 G20 meetings for the Australian government previously. And one of the important things that the ADB president and others told us, that the seamless way in the entire conference was facilitated, they said is unprecedented. Unprecedented. They said even they said, they ventured out to say this is the best ADB conference ever. They made this the best ADB conference ever. I'd like to thank everybody who participated. I spoke to the ladies in the hotels, the ladies who were cleaning the rooms, the porters, the gardeners, the taxi drivers. They all felt an immense sense of pride that Fiji was hosting such an event. And they, I can tell you, had more economic and financial sense than any of those people sitting on the other side of the house. They understood. They understood the meaning and the opportunity that's been created by this ADB annual meeting, Mr. Speaker, sir. I'd like to thank them all for doing a sterling job, despite some people trying to sabotage the entire process. Mr. Speaker, sir, the estimated cost of hosting the event was around, at this point in time, $13.1 million. And we are still making payments on this. The government had allocated $10 million. We received $6.9 million in cash sponsorship, including from countries like Australia and New Zealand. And also the remaining was provided by way of aid in kind or kind support. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me shed some light on the outcome of the discussions, dialogue in meetings during the annual meeting. Mr. Speaker, sir, we had the 29th Pacific Development Member Countries meeting. The Republic of Marshall Islands actually chaired the 29th, what we call the PDMC. And in that, Mr. Speaker, sir, we had countries like the Cook Islands, Federated States of Micronesia, Fiji, Kiribati, Republic of Marshall Islands, Nauru, Papua New Guinea, Republic of Palau, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Timor-Leste, Tonga, Tuvalu, Vanuatu, and the newly joined member of ADB, which is Niue. Mr. Speaker, sir, they all, of course, congratulated Fiji. And indeed, as we said, as the Honourable Prime Minister also said, that we saw the ADB meeting as a Pacific meeting that we were hosting, and we wanted it to be a Pacific event. And indeed, there are specific displays regarding the Pacific Island countries and the work they engage with in the ADB. Of course, Mr. Speaker, the PDMC also allows and provides the forum for us to be able to directly engage with ADB as a regional subgroup, and how we can talk with and engage with our multilateral partners, not just ADB, but others present. I'd like to also very quickly highlight, Mr. Speaker, sir, some of the areas that we did discuss on the PDMC with the ADB were on the fragility and vulnerability in respect of concessional finance. The PDMC governors reiterated the need for ADB to offer what we call differential pricing mechanisms for ordinary capital resources. This would mean, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the middle-income countries like Fiji and Cook Islands would be able to access highly concessional financing from the ADB. As I highlighted earlier on, World Bank has already agreed to this, so we are getting IDA funds. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Pacific ministers also expressed their disappointment and frustration over the inclusion of Fiji, Marshall Islands, Samoa and Vanuatu in the European Union tax haven blacklist, or the blacklist as they call it. A few other Pacific member countries are currently under review and expected to be added to the blacklist. This is quite unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, sir, and the Finance Minister showed a strong dissent over the EU's approach, calling the process non-transparent and unfair, adding that it undermined the development aspirations of small and vulnerable countries in the guise of tax cooperation. Mr. Speaker, sir, as said in Parliament previously, there was no consensus. There was no consensus on a bilateral basis, and indeed there was consensus amongst the finance ministers that the process was non-transparent. And indeed we are looking at issuing a letter on the regional basis to the European Union. Mr. Speaker, sir, as I highlighted earlier on, the Australians did present their facility of $2 billion to the PDMCs. And as I have also highlighted, Mr. Speaker, sir, that Fiji and Australians are very keen to use some of that financing to help us with the Nandi rehabilitation project, which we hope to actually get the bricks and mortar starting at least on stage 1 of the Nandi River, which includes from the town end up towards the Nandi River. Mr. Speaker, sir, interestingly enough, also at the ADB, the Irish launched their trust fund, and through the ADB, Mr. Speaker, sir, where they announced that they'll be channeling funds through the ADB to the tune of 12 million euros, aimed at supporting climate resilience and disaster preparedness in the SIDS. Mr. Speaker, sir, we also are very glad to meet the new Vice President of the World Bank, of the ADB, Mr. Ahmed Sayed, who's a new person who has replaced the previous person who's gone off to the Middle East. And it was very inspiring because he's come from a private sector financial background, working in places like Morgan Stanley, etc., or Stanley Morgan. And he, in fact, identified Fiji as having remarkable development progress in the last few years and acknowledged Fiji's contribution to global leadership. But he also said that he wanted to use Fiji as an example to the rest of the Pacific and would like to work with us on a number of projects to showcase as a Fiji to the rest of the Pacific and other countries. And we are looking at supporting the ICT sector, diversification of our tourism, as I highlighted, into aged care, into medical tourism, investment in soft infrastructure, and also to assist Fiji to propel private sector development. And there has been a huge level of funds that have been allocated by the ADB in that respect, about $100 million, and they will work directly with the private sector. As highlighted in the past few days, Mr. Speaker, sir, we had a specific Governors Roundtable where you had countries like USA, China, Germany, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, Malaysia, Australia, and all the other key countries. And it was a closed session Governors Roundtable on the heightened global uncertainty in respect of global economics. Of course, since then, Mr. Speaker, sir, we know after that particular event, a week or so later, the US has now imposed a 25% tariff on all Chinese goods. There's been a notable slowdown in the global economies in the second half of 2018, largely due to the weakening growth in the major advanced economies, the US, Europe, and Japan. Of course, the trade tensions between the US and China uncertainty, enormous level of uncertainty regarding Brexit and the growth slowdown in China and the general tightening of global financial conditions. These risks are tilted to downside with the possibility of further escalation of trade tension between China and USA. We of course sit on the periphery, but we will also get affected by it, in particular if trading partners with China, such as Australia, that sends a lot of its raw materials to China, if there's a muted demand for those raw materials, it will have enormous impact on Australian arrivals into Fiji. We have seen, of course, a slower, in fact, downturn or growth in the tourism sector since January of this year, and we need to prepare ourselves. As I highlighted a few days ago, we need to put in place anticipatory measures. And of course, this will affect the other Pacific Island countries too. As highlighted, we've already said this before, we need to build fiscal buffers. We have set the right policies, right, to be able to mitigate the negative implications from the adverse external events and pursue long-term structural adjustments to diversify the economy and reduce and remove hindrances that constrain on our true economic potential. Honourable Prasad talked about ease of doing business. I don't think you were here, Honourable Prasad, when Honourable Minister for Industry and Trade talked about the various current initiatives that we have with the Singaporeans in respect of mitigating those issues pertaining to ease of doing business. We also had, Mr. Speaker, sir, a opportunity, what we call the role of tourism for sustainable development, hosted by the famous Zainab Badawi from BBC. It consisted of the Deputy Prime Minister of Japan. We had Mr. Taro Aso, the Deputy Prime Minister, who was also the Governor for Japan. Mulyani Indrawati, a very influential lady, who is also the Minister of Finance for Indonesia and has worked with World Bank and IMF. And we have representation from Italy and from Philippines too, and of course Fiji was there too. Discussion also focused on the need to ensure continuous diversification of the tourism sector, establishment of new source markets and airline routes, protection, of course, of our traditions and culture and environment, including developing niche tourism segments like medical tourism. Mr. Speaker said it is very encouraging. I urge the members, www.adb.org, you can go to that website and you will see all the programs from there. Talking about the youth, again, Honourable Gary Tambua has disappeared. We had a host country seminar, 30 under 30, where we we had a competition throughout Fiji. There's a young population, Mr. Speaker, so we decided to focus our host country seminar on the youth. We knew from the start that it was an opportunity to showcase and throw a spotlight on our young people. As such, Mr. Speaker, so we decided to enlist the help of the entire nation to launch a nationwide search for success stories of rising young trailblazers across business, government, civil society, all aged below the age of 30. Mr. Speaker, so our goal in all of this was to identify 30 leaders under the age of 30 or faces of Fiji's future and honor them with first of its kind recognition that served as a foundation. And again, we had the host, very well-known Australian trailblazer herself, who hosted the particular seminar. Mr. Speaker, sir, a lot of comments were made about the fact that we're not doing anything for the youth. The Minister for Youth, the Minister for Agriculture, the Minister for Industry and Trade, the various initiatives in place, the Minister for Education, and there's so many. I really do not know where Honourable Gary Tambua is getting information from. And I don't want to highlight that at this point in time. Mr. Speaker, sir, we also had a wonderful opportunity where we had a host country reception at the Intercontinental, again which was lauded as one of the best, where we were able to demonstrate and help people participate in authentic Fijian atmosphere, Fijian foods, by Fijian, the overwhelming Fijian hospitality. We had students from the traditional dances, the fire dances, Rishikul College, etc., Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, we had, of course, a number of bilateral meetings. There are too many to highlight. But the annual gathering provided a valuable opportunity for member countries to discuss key global and regional issues, development challenges and opportunities. It also provided an avenue for discussion of financing options that suit the development priorities and economic financial needs of member countries. ADB remains a genuine development partner for Fiji and has assisted us through various technical assistance programs by financing a number of infrastructure projects. It is a proud moment for all of us as Fijians to have been able to host the annual meeting of ADB with great enthusiasm and pride, and use this as an opportunity to showcase the determination and ability of Fiji to successfully host such large events. We are confident, Mr. Speaker, sir, that because of the success of the ADB annual meeting, Fiji has become an ideal hosting spot for even large events, like international sporting tournaments, concerts and other large events that support the growth of our tourism even in the off-season. Mr. Speaker, sir, ADB annual meeting has given Fiji another special spot on the global map, and I thank everybody for that. Naka.